Okay, welcome. This is Doug McCall from the International School Health Network, a member of the FRESH Partnership, who is we're both sponsoring this particular session. I'd like to welcome you to this discussion of the Education and Workforce Initiative from the Education Commission. As you may have read the materials, the Commission has commissioned this work to look at the education workforce as we move towards the 2030 goals, and it's a very important piece of work that we need to understand. From our perspective within the FRESH Partnership and the International School Health Network, this has provided us with an opportunity to think more deeply about workforce development in the area of health and personal and social development education, both from the educators as well as others who actually do education within schools and after school and so on, that we're interested in formulating some directions for research and for practice. So we're very pleased to be welcoming our speakers. I'm going to introduce the three speakers together. Amy Pellinger and Katie Goodwin are staff with the Education Workforce Initiative with the Education Commission, and will be taking us through the two reports, the two documents they've developed thus far. One is a review of the research which was commissioned for EWI over the last few months, and then also an outline of the report that they're developing for their as the deliverable for their work. And we'll have a chance to walk through those documents and see them in more depth. I've also asked Professor Alawali Morinkola to respond to the thoughts that are presented, and Professor Morinkola is a professor of health and education in Nigeria, and has also had experience as a dean of education, and so is going to be able to respond to that. And then we'll open it up for conversation and discussion. So without further ado, Amy and Katie, if you'd like to take it over.
Great, thank you very much, Doug. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Brilliant. So thank you very much for the opportunity, Doug, to present an overview of our Education Workforce Initiative and some of the research themes that we're looking at in our Education Workforce report. I'm leading this initiative for the Commission, and Katie is the research associate, and she's leading on the Education Workforce report. I will just start by taking you through what we're going to go over in this session, and then I'll hand over to Katie to give you a bit more of an overview of what we're doing, and then I will take you through some of the themes from the Education Workforce report. So we expect to speak for about 20 minutes and then hopefully have plenty of time for questions. I hope that's okay. And then finally at the end we will talk about some of the next steps in this initiative and how potentially you can be involved if you're interested. So Katie, I will hand over to you to just explain briefly about the Education Commission.
Okay, great. Thank you, Amy. Hello, everyone. It's nice to be here with you today. I'll begin with a little background on the Education Commission. So the Commission is a global initiative that was established in 2015, and it was tasked with engaging key stakeholders in education to help reinvigorate the case for better reform and increased investment in education. So in 2016, the Commission released the Learning Generation Report, which outlined a plan to deliver and finance universal quality education for every child with a focus on performance and financing. So the Commission is currently working with partners to implement some of the key recommendations from this report around improving the performance of education delivery at the system level, diversifying and strengthening the education workforce, and mobilizing more and better finance around education. So the Education Workforce Initiative seeks to turn the Commission's Learning Generation recommendations to expand, strengthen, and rethink the education workforce into action. And this involves looking critically at the latest evidence and exploring innovative practices that can inform new ways of approaching workforce design and implementation to ensure a quality education for all students. So the vision of the Workforce Initiative is a professional education workforce that is able to meet the changing demands for skills and capacity. This is one where teachers can spend more time teaching, where innovation is leveraged for better learning, and where professional development is strengthened through quality training and support. So why is this important now? In the Learning Generation report, the Commission projected that between 2015 and 2030, demand for teachers in low-income countries will nearly double. And in some countries, this means that over half of all the graduates will be needed to meet this demand. Additionally, we know that there are shortages within systems in certain subjects like math and science, as well as in certain areas such as rural and remote locations, even without the expansion that's required. But we know that increasing the supply of qualified teachers is not going to be enough. The role of the teacher needs to adjust and be redefined in light of a holistic quality education, especially as the context in which education is taking place and the skills young people need are changing rapidly. And at the same time, keeping in mind that even basic learning outcomes are not being achieved, which are necessary for building these newer skills. And we know that part of the issue is that teachers are often too burdened with administrative and non-teaching tasks to focus their effort exclusively on teaching and learning, or they simply don't have the tools and support they need. But we've seen innovations already happening in delivery and school management, and this means that change in some areas, including around teacher time and responsibilities, is more possible than ever. So it's in this context that we think it's worthwhile to consider how the health sector has understood and reformed its workforce, allowing for a more diverse set of roles to encompass the necessary skills and competencies that are required to keep people healthy. So supporting roles in health are distinct, professionalized, and used extensively. These include nursing assistants, who have been used to release some of a doctor's time by updating medical records, for example, and nurse practitioners who are able to take basic diagnostic tests. And an illuminating example here between health and education can be seen in Chile, where there are 4.5 nursing and midwife personnel to every doctor, while in the education sector, there is less than half a teacher aide and support staff for every teacher. So we know teachers are expected to embody a wide range of roles that take away time from their instructional responsibilities, and these could be more suited to other roles. So here we're not saying that education is the same as health or that education should emulate health in this way. It's certainly not about comparing roles, but that the example of health, which as a sector has looked at the entire workforce at a systems level, presents an opportunity for us to look at the education workforce and consider how building teams of distinct and professionalized roles could better support quality education. So with this in mind, we hope that the Education Workforce Initiative will firstly catalyze thinking on innovative approaches to strengthening and rethinking the education workforce, including how to better utilize existing roles and potentially introduce roles that do not currently exist. Secondly, to generate new insights into how successful reform in the education workforce has been or could be implemented through the production of the Education Workforce Report, really focusing on how and the enabling conditions for scaling up and applying principles from successful practices and reform. We also hope the initiative will build on cross-sectoral and cross-geographical learning and collaboration to ensure that the knowledge generated is not only relevant, applicable, and accessible, but is also inciting new thinking. And then finally, we hope the initiative will inform and support the development of country-specific options for education workforce reform, not only in the countries we're working with, but on a broader scale as well. So the Education Workforce Initiative will hope to meet these objectives by covering 3 priority areas, which were determined and refined through an extensive consultation process with key stakeholders and actors in the field. And these include, first, looking at the design of the education workforce with a focus on district, cluster, and school level, to first understand the roles and functioning of the current education workforce, with particular attention to the composition as far as which roles are explicit now and what individuals in these roles are actually doing, and to think about if the right roles are in place to improve efficiency and effectiveness in the education system and provide a holistic quality education. And then the next step would be to rethink what the workforce could look like in light of the changing nature of learning and the skills required for the 21st century, while also keeping in mind, as I said previously, that basic skills are still a significant challenge that many countries face and are necessary to build on the 21st century skills. The second priority area involves exploring specifically the changing roles of the teacher, school and district leaders, and thinking through the introduction and professionalization of other roles within the workforce if necessary, and again, so that they are fit for the 21st century and have a strong focus on leading learning for a holistic education. And the third focus area involves considering ways to strengthen the already existing education workforce across the life cycle, so from recruitment to professional development, and to think about successful practices that would work for a redesigned workforce as well, which might require different roles or compositions of roles across schools and districts. So the initiative will approach these priorities through two key deliverables. The first is through an education workforce report, which will explore these priority areas, aiming to be future-oriented in considering what education could be like in the near future. It will do so through a summary of recent evidence, drawing from lessons from other sectors, and particularly from the health sector, as I have mentioned, which has made progress in diversifying its workforce and thinking about design at a more systems level. The report will also include in-depth case studies of how effective education workforce reform and innovative approaches have been implemented and their enabling factors. And we hope to lead the report with a revised vision for the education workforce and its roles and the implications of this vision on workforce design and implementation, which would include considerations around financing, political economy, short and long-term policy goals as well. So we do hope to bring some new thinking through a number of different perspectives and approaches to the report. These include providing qualitative information on how effective approaches to strengthening the workforce have been implemented by utilizing a labor economist approach to inform considerations around implementation. So this could include modeling of supply and demand with new workforce configurations, as well as modeling the financial implications of the new reforms. And then finally, by focusing on the teams of professionals required to improve learning and provide a holistic education, not just on the role of the teacher, but as I already mentioned, on school and district leaders and key support staff within and across schools. So the goal is to bring together good practice and be forward thinking on what works, particularly in low income contexts and for primary and secondary education, and to focus on how successful or promising reforms have been implemented. And the report is primarily geared towards policymakers with the goal of informing education workforce reform. So the second deliverable for the Education Workforce Initiative involves working with a set of 3 countries to co-develop education workforce reform options. So this work will involve some primary research, as Amy already mentioned, in these countries, and we hope that that work will inform the Education Workforce Report, and that in turn the countries will be able to use the report as a resource and a tool moving forward in their education workforce reforms. So the 3 countries we are working with are Ghana, Sierra Leone, and Vietnam. And in each country, a local partner and potentially a fellow will lead on the development of the policy options with the government and other stakeholders. And we have started work with countries to identify the priority areas that EWI will help address within the area of the workforce. And we will most likely begin collecting primary data this fall. Okay, so very briefly, the Education Workforce Initiative is led and managed by the Education Commission and funded by DFID. Guiding this initiative is our high-level steering group, which is chaired by former Minister of Education.
Sorry, Katie, can I just jump in? I think someone has their microphone on and giving some background noise, so if we could just turn off our mics, that would be good. Thanks.
Okay. Great, thank you. Our high-level steering group is chaired by Joo-Ho Lee, who's the former Minister of Education in South Korea and one of our commissioners. And it's jointly co-chaired by Thea Soa, who's the CEO of the African Women's Development Fund and also one of our commissioners, and Susan Hopgood, the President of Education International. We also have an advisory group consisting of key stakeholders and other initiatives or organizations who are working on education workforce issues, including UNESCO Teachers Task Force, GPE, international agencies, and other relevant NGOs. And then finally, we have our research partners who are helping us lead on the Education Workforce Report and partners with our work in country as well. Okay, so very quickly, the Education Workforce Initiative has been in conversation widely with other initiatives, organizations, and efforts working on education workforce issues. You can see a few of those listed here, and we will continue to engage with these actors to ensure we are leveraging learnings from their work and building on what they're doing, and syncing up on any in-country work as well. And we are also working very closely with Education International to help us draw on input from teachers, school leaders, other members of the education workforce, as their voices are crucial to what we are doing. So during the design of the Education Workforce Initiative, we thought deeply about how this initiative could add value to a space in which so many actors are already hard at work. And again, through a very wide consultation process, we identified areas that have not been focused on as much, and perspectives that had not really been taken into account in a holistic way, particularly around thinking about the workforce as a whole and looking at the appropriateness of the design, and exploring more holistically roles other than teachers, including school and district leaders, education support personnel, and others, as I've mentioned. Okay, so just a few words about our timescales. The Education Workforce Initiative was officially launched in March with the first high-level steering group meeting. And before then, we had an initial literature review and scoping study conducted by Open University, which will be available on our website soon. And this piece, as well as an extensive consultation process, helped to shape the Education Workforce Report outline and key questions, as well as identify important challenges. So we've now put a team together to take forward the Education Workforce Report, which will kick off at the end of this month and conclude next March in 2019 with the release of the report. So we do have quite a short time frame for this research, as you can see. And then the country work, as I've mentioned, we've already done some of the preliminary preparations and hope to begin data collection this fall around September. And this work will proceed until the end of next year. So now I will pass it back to Amy to provide a more detailed explanation of what we're aiming to do with the Education Workforce Report, and outline some of the themes we'll be exploring.
Great, thank you, Katie. Does anyone have any questions on, I guess, Education Workforce Initiative as a whole before I go into some of the themes, or shall I just carry on?
Well, maybe just jump in with a comment. I think it becomes very real to me. We, in the FRESH partnership, we've been having a series of webinars on low resource countries, and we've been taking more of a programmatic focus. And very often in those webinars, we're learning about how teachers are asked to do a variety of health-related or social-related tasks that I think are not, I wouldn't call it distracting them from their teaching role, but certainly taking them from their teaching role. Things such as vision screening. They're actually helping to do some rudimentary screening of vision for their students. In the mental health area, we learned that they're learning more about referrals to psychosocial support in the community. So they're almost being a bit of a medical mental health clinician a bit in that regard. In hygiene, they're asked to make sure they teach their kids about washing their hands and brushing their teeth, and taking up some of the school routines to do that. So there's a number of very practical activities that teachers are asked to do. And I also had a chance to do some work in Oman, which is I guess a high or middle income country, where the Sultan decided that he was going to bring in a school nurse in every school, and of course the school nurse took over those kinds of activities from there was a designated health teacher who was responsible in every school for that, but the school nurse also took on an educational role and did a lot of co-curricular education in the school. So I guess for me, your work is made evident in a very concrete way through those many examples that I've been learning about, and I think it's a very real challenge for the countries in moving forward. I'm sorry to take long with that comment, but I think it was a way of illustrating exactly the challenge that the EWI is addressing.
Thanks very much, Doug. That's helpful, and I think those comments you've just made very much what we've been hearing as well. Sorry, did someone else want to say something?
Yes, this is Moron Kola from Nigeria.
Oh,
Hello?
Hello.
Yes.
Hello. Okay. In line with what Nicole said, let me ask about the difficulties you are having. Is there any difficulty you're asking? Because you find out to achieve much in the area of education, especially in the developing world. There's this problem of healthful living environment. How do you want to factor this in your work? The healthful school living environment. How do you intend to factor into your work?
The school living environment, did you say? So I just want to make sure I've
Yes.
heard correctly. So do you mean for teacher housing and things, or do you mean the kind of the infrastructure of schools?
Yes, and to ensure that learners, you have life skills that can promote learners working together, so that you have less problem of bullying, less problem of substance use and violence. Because no matter how the program is, who the program is, if no matter the capacity of the teachers in delivering, the school environment is so important. So how are you addressing this? How are you addressing this in your work?
Yeah, so as part of the rethinking of the workforce, we're thinking about using an organization design approach, which looks at the outcomes that a district or school or community want to achieve, and then works backwards and looks at the organization, the people, the processes and the roles, but also the culture, and will identify I guess, and try and articulate the culture required and the enabling factors required to implement the new workforce design, if you like. So we will pull out some of the preconditions around that. But I guess in terms of implementation, we then have to make sure that we are linking whatever other policy implications. They might not just be within the workforce, they might be within other elements of the education system. And that's what makes it a lot more complicated, is because it's very difficult to look at anything in isolation without taking into account all of the enabling factors needed. So I think as part of it, we will try and capture the culture, pull out the enabling conditions, and then make sure that our policy considerations are reflecting not just workforce policy, but other policy elements too. And actually the violence by the workforce and on the workforce is quite high up the agenda, because DFID, Department of International Development in the UK, are funding this, and it's one of the areas that they want to see addressed.
Excellent. Maybe, Amy, you could then take us into the research themes, and then we'll come back for a broader discussion.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to take you a bit through an overview of the Education Workforce Report itself. We have put this out for wide feedback from our high-level steering group and the advisory group. So basically we have the structure in front of you. So in the introduction, we obviously want to be clear about what we're trying to do with this report, what the research questions are. And then to your point, we want to situate this somehow within a systems frame and show how the education workforce is obviously interlinked with many, many other elements of delivering an education system, and somehow show pictorially what those interdependencies might be. And how we need to think about those implications when we're thinking about the workforce. And then secondly, this is where we want to draw on the experiences from other sectors, health, but also other public sector reforms, so that we can make sure that we're learning from those at the outset. Then the second chapter on the vision for education and the implications for the workforce. So this is where we want to look at some of the macro drivers of change, so changes to economy, demography, technology, and look at some things that will be happening in 2030 and 2040. And then look at some of the literature on holistic quality education, including both learning but also well-being. And then saying if that's the kind of quality education that education systems want to produce, then what workforce do you need to do that? And then we'll start to look at some potentially different scenarios of what that means for the workforce requirements. Then we'll look at the current challenges and needs, and we've just summarised them here. So as Katie said, Frida Wolfenden from the Open University did some initial research for us, which I think you've seen, just to help us understand what literature was already out there, what evidence, and what could we use to then frame the research going forwards. And these are some of the kind of common challenges that have come up from her research and also from, you know, us speaking to all the different stakeholders and countries. So a combination of, you know, students not learning what they need to, teachers not being prepared, supported in the right way, the lack of teachers, as we've mentioned, and enough time on teaching and learning, as we mentioned, but also a lack of data, actually, which helps inform us on the current workforce, particularly beyond teachers. Most data is collected on teachers, but you can't really see data on the other roles and how they change as they go through the kind of their life cycle, if you like. And also very little information on the costs and impact of implementing education workforce reforms, and to help us understand what's effective. So those are some of the challenges that we'll want to address. And when we're writing the report, we're trying to think about using 3 different typologies which try and focus on some specific challenges. So we're thinking of looking at the needs of a small rural primary school with, you know, limited resources, limited connectivity, potentially a large urban primary school, and then a secondary school, and trying to also consider that the different stage in education development that a country might be at, and what it therefore might need to think about with regards to the workforce at those different stages. So we'll try and lay that out in this chapter. The next chapter then will be on designing the education workforce. So looking at it as a whole and thinking about the different levels from national, regional, district down to, you know, school and classroom, and what are the needs of the workforce and how might they work as teams, both within schools and across schools. So some of the questions that we're asking are what kind of teams are needed, at school and district level, how do existing roles need to be redefined and what new roles are needed to facilitate and guide the learning of all students and support their health and welfare? How could current and future technology enable these roles? And how can these roles better reflect the communities they serve? So to make sure that there are enough, you know, female teachers to encourage more girls to go to school, that there are enough indigenous population teachers, that the local languages are better incorporated. So taking those elements into account. And then once, I guess just to say on this designing the workforce, it will be a combination of some primary research in our 3 countries on what roles already exist, both formal roles and informal roles, what do they do, how effective they are, and looking for opportunities for how that might be able to be redesigned, working with groups of local stakeholders to get their input. So there'll be some primary research. Then there'll also be some secondary research which looks at existing reforms that have taken place, what has worked, what hasn't worked, how was the buy-in obtained for making those reforms, and we'll draw out some principles and some roles that we think have the most potential to be looked at in the rest of the report. And at the moment we're probably thinking about the role of a district education officer, or potentially a kind of circuit supervisor who provides that support directly to schools, a school leader, a teacher, and then some form of education support personnel. And we will go into more detail on each of those in the next chapter. So the next chapter then is, if this is the design and these are the roles we want, how do we attract the right people to them? How do we train them, prepare them? How do we deploy them? How do we support them? What kind of career paths do they have? And making sure that some of those roles that haven't received the attention to date are encouraged or helped to be more professional and better supported. And again, we need to think about how might digital technologies, where appropriate, be harnessed to help in some of that support. There are examples of using Skype or phone for coaching teachers. There are examples of teachers using platforms to share learning materials. So what benefits and what are some of the enabling factors required for some of those technologies to add value? And then also thinking about, the large number of education workforce professionals already in place. Like what do they need to motivate them, to retain them, and be supported to continue through their career in a way that is most effective and rewarding for them? And how can leadership, management, oversight roles be strengthened? And I suppose we're particularly interested in pedagogical or instructional leadership here, and in encouraging, the right culture and the right change management so that quality education can be delivered. And obviously, as I mentioned, we'll need to pull out what the preconditions or enabling factors need to be in place for these types of reforms. And then the next chapter then is, so if this is the design, this is how, if you like, they would be implemented, how practically, in terms of what actually as a policymaker do you need to do to implement. And so we want to do some political economy analysis. Again, we'll do some primary research in our 3 countries, but then draw out more broadly some political economy considerations when doing education workforce redesign. We want to look at the economist side of this, so both from a supply and demand point of view, but also from a costing point of view. I think one of our big messages is that we don't want to put forward proposals that are going to cost a lot more, and we want to see what efficiencies already exist within systems that can be harnessed to make the most of some of the resources or the roles that already exist. And we recognise that countries don't have loads of money to add on loads of different roles, which is why we think actually you need to rethink the design at the outset. And then where there potentially is some additional financing, how could financing be obtained? And finally, what are the short and long-term policy considerations and steps that a policymaker might take, or tools or strategies to start to think about the workforce more broadly? And then I guess so that's broadly the workforce report, and then just to come on to the next steps, which I started with. So we're beginning that research on the workforce report now. We're starting the conversations, we're continuing the conversations with countries. We've been having them for the last 6 or 7 months on the specific areas to support. So for example, in Ghana, it's likely we'll support on looking at the education workforce required to deliver their Education 2030 plan, education sector plan, and looking at the strategic workforce planning and the supply and demand needed of the redesign to fulfill that plan. In Vietnam, it looks like we'll be focusing on how to rethink STEM teacher education so that teachers are more able to provide a more adapted, high-touch, project-based, problem-solving learning environment for their students. And Sierra Leone we've still to discuss. And then we have our next high-level steering group meeting on the 27th of September in New York, where we'll get some feedback on the initial research plans and some of the initial research we've done. And at that point, the advisory group will be offered the opportunity to provide feedback. So what I was going to suggest, if there's anyone that's interested in being on that, we would welcome feedback on our deliverables as we progress through the next 18 months. So I think that's all I wanted to say, but obviously very happy to take questions and be part of a discussion.
Excellent. Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Katie. Maybe just going back to Olawale, Professor Molonkala, do you have comments and thoughts or questions? We've covered a lot of ground in the background, but hopefully you did have a chance to read through the materials. Any thoughts as to or questions for Amy or Katie?
But let me first of all thank them for their presentation. Towards the end of the presentation, I'm very impressed about the issue of the political economic influence. And I will give you one experience we have here in Nigeria. We have what we used to call the grade 2 teachers in the past. Suddenly the government tries to do away with that level of teacher training. And what we have was introduced what we now call the Nigeria Certificate in Education. But at the time of considering this issue of another level of certification, the government did not thought it fit to look at the issue of the financial implication. And that's for following years, you have a lot of stress in the educational system because the government and the private sector in the education system in the country are unable to pay the teachers. And if you are familiar with the Nigerian education system, you find out that there is like in the education system at almost at all level, because the issue of the labor, putting the lens of the labor economics into planning the education workforce was not considered. Instead of strengthening the curriculum, instead of making sure that teachers are more alive to their responsibility, it is the issue of certification. So I was so much impressed about this aspect which you are bringing to your work. Again, I also want a little bit for you to explain more on the issue of the current challenges we have throughout the world, how the issue of workforce will be able to address the issue of gender imbalance. I know you talk about the girl child in your work, but even among the workforce in Nigeria, especially, you have more female teachers in school. How do you want to ensure the issue of gender issue, as well as making sure that what we call contemporary issues in the world, the issue of climate change, is even addressed in your work, so that there will be a consciousness among the workforce to contribute with the problem we are now facing throughout the world. Thank you. Hello?
Yes, thank you.
Hello?
Yes, thank you, Professor. That was an excellent couple of comments. And maybe what we'll do, since we're a relatively smaller group, I'm going to open it up and ask for questions or comments from all of us on the line, and then ask for our two speakers to respond, and then open it up for broader discussion.
Okay.
Thank you. And thank you for your comments. I think the reality of the financing is one that is overhangs all of our work, I think. But maybe to open it up to others, I see Claire has asked for a question about the terms of reference, and maybe we'll go to this one because it is quite a specific question. The dynamics between the EWI and the stakeholders in ministries of education in different countries. Can you maybe elaborate on that a bit, Katie or or Amy?
Sure, I'm happy to take the dynamics at country level. I'm not sure which terms of reference you mean. Do you mean for education workforce as a whole or for the specific EWR? But just on the country level. So in terms of the dynamics, we did some research about which countries we felt that we would be most likely to add value to. And in those countries, we then asked for the minister to put forward the person that they thought should be on the high-level steering group for this entire programme, if you like. And so we have in Sierra Leone and Ghana the heads of the teacher service commissions or teaching service councils, and in Vietnam the minister himself, and actually from Myanmar as well, the Minister of Education himself. So they are involved in education workforce as a whole. Then in terms of the country work, they are our key linchpin, if you like. And so they have been the ones that have been organising the visits and ensuring that we're engaging with a very wide range of stakeholders at country level. Also, because we have the connection with Education International, they have been mobilising the unions at country level to make sure that they have been prepared for our visits. And so the unions have got together and made sure that, they've got their key points ready. And at country level, we're trying to get a broad range of stakeholders, so both kind of academics, researchers, foundations, practitioners, implementing members of the ministry at different levels, representatives of head teachers associations, district directors associations. So we're trying to work very closely together. What we need to do is find a local partner who can lead this on the ground, but we expect them to be doing it with the government in together, if you like, providing the kind of the facilitation and getting input when necessary. But the reason we want to so the reason it's going to be different in each country is we're trying to address specific issues in each specific country. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and Claire, if you just wanted to click on your mic, if you wanted to jump in with speaking, that'd be great. But I think that does clarify that part of that. And I see others are adding comments, so I'm going to. Orkan has added a comment about also very appreciative of the insights, and I'm just reading through it as we speak.
Yeah. So I guess on the financial, how to ensure the financial specters. Yeah, so for the education workforce report, we've got someone that's going to be looking at it from an inclusion perspective and from a gender perspective. And then we've got a QA. It's hopefully going to be Pauline Rose from University of Cambridge, who is very focused on progressive approaches and addressing the needs of the marginalised. So we're trying to build that into our report itself. I'm not sure again if that's answering the questions. Yeah, and in fact in countries, so in Ghana when I was there a couple of weeks ago, I think the request, and it's the same in Vietnam, is to try and address the most hard to reach and the most marginalised, because they're the ones that the kind of traditional approaches are not working for. So if we can try and focus on those groups and think of new ways to approach the workforce in those particular areas, I think that's where we can add value. So that will be a strong focus, particularly for the country work, and also for the education workforce report, which is why we wanted to try and pick typologies to use to try and focus the questions around. Yeah, in terms of the longer term analysis of the impacts of changes, yeah. So So we have funding from DFID till the end of next year, in effect, to do the design and to come up with the support for implementation. As part of that, we would like to get a research and evaluation plan of the implementation put in place and funding to pay for that, because there's no way that we'll be able to learn if we're not evaluating and sharing those lessons. So I see that as a second phase, if you like. Our first phase is to get the workforce report done and the designs in each country, and then we'll get a evaluation plan for the implementation.
Excellent, and that was Dan's question, which is the last one posted, and also jumping in with I really like you're looking at the ground in terms of the rural school and the urban school and a secondary school, and then working back upwards into the school systems in terms of the district level agencies and then the country examples. It's refreshing, to be frank, to see a systems approach that's actually trying to be looked at in the real world, and so it's very helpful to that. If that can be one of the guiding lights for your work, it's very helpful, I think, and it's going to be illuminating for others who we often come up with great reports, but they're just not connected to the ground level. So it's very helpful. Professor Moroncola has asked another question. Can we see how the workforce can be local in approach in delivering their services, but make learners think and act locally, but also globally, or see themselves as global citizens? And I guess that's going a little bit to the goals of education question, but it also goes, I think, in terms of workforce development for all of us, in terms of acting locally but thinking globally.
Yeah, I suppose that comes some extent down to curriculum. So I think I see that as one of an example of an interdependency, really, between what the curriculum is, both for teachers and members of the education workforce, but also for students themselves. I think we definitely agree with a local approach to the workforce, but I understand that then needs additional thinking in terms of linking to the global. So I think I'll make a note of that as one of the interdependencies that we're going to have to make a note of to be addressed through curriculum, for example.
Thank you. And that takes us back a little bit to Claire's question, which was looking at how the goals of education, and I was, again, appreciative of the fact that you're using the term holistic education, because that's more encompassing of life skills and the health and personal and social development issues that many of us deal with. But that in many ways the view of a holistic education then generates the workforces needed in education, and so that they are interconnected, and that interdependence is there. And just to add a little bit for Claire's information, that's part of the focus of the work that Dan and Orkin and several of us are working on to try to flesh that out. And we've been very pleased that the EWI has raised that as an issue for us, at least, as we begin to look at workforce development. It's helping us take a longer term view. Further questions or comment? Go ahead. Sure.
So just on Claire's question, so have we defined basic skills and new skills for the 21st century? So we did ask Open University to kind of look at some of the literature around this, and they looked at more curriculums implemented. I think they looked at 50 curriculums that have been implemented in developing countries since 2000. And they found some, I think, 8 common themes that came through. Things like, global, an understanding of kind of global citizenship, collaboration. And they're in the initial research and can share that if you haven't got it. But I think for this, we need to draw. We won't do new thinking on the skills that are required, but we need to draw on existing research which helps us frame it. So if you have suggestions on research which helps us, define these, very statements which can be understood in many different ways, it would be really helpful. But we do want to get that mixture between getting the basics right and being able to, embrace more 21st century learning. So if you have suggestions for resources for us to draw on, then we would be love to hear about them.
That's great, and Katie has responded as well. The report and the outline are posted at the Fresh Partners website, which I've just posted online. The address, and if you look for the webinars page, you'll see the webinars list and the documents that the EWI is working with are linked there, as well as some others, and of course the recording from this session will be linked there as well.
But there's definitely more work to be done on that framing. So, so all thoughts and research welcome, and your input as well, Doug, is very helpful.
Great.
Hi, Amy. Do you copy me?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks again for the great presentation. I just read your report when Doug sent it, the one on EC Initial Research EWR March 2018. This is the report we are talking about, and the presentation is based upon. Is this right?
So that is just the initial research that was undertaken to frame this bigger report. So the Education Workforce report is what's happening now, but that's what has helped us frame it, if you like.
Yeah, and great. And there's a table on page 61, further details of the 16 skills, the C21 skills, and you just asked if we have more information of those skills. I could provide some more information on health literacy, also in combination with information literacy and media literacy, which are all somehow interconnected to health literacy. Because when I look at the definitions, I partly see there are some differences between the commonly used definitions of those concepts and those that you have used here. And maybe we can, I don't know, exchange and somehow reshape them so that these definitions used here in this document are closer to those that are currently being used, for example, in school health promotion or public health or other research fields. I don't know how relevant this is or how significant it would be for further implementing your program, but definitively I could provide some more information on that if you wish.
Yes, please. That would be great. That would be really, really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I assume, do people have access to our email addresses, Doug?
No, but we can do that, or you could just post them into the chat box. We'll do that as part of the. If you're okay with this, we'll put it into the session description on the Fresh Partners website. And you can post them. Just send them as a quick message now for those who are online.
Great.
That would be helpful.
Yeah, that would be great.
Dan has another question about the emphasis on efficiency, looking at the longer-term capacity building and a framework for building an infrastructure for growth. Is that an issue that you're going to be looking at as well?
So efficiency, definitely, because I think the only way that any change will be possible is through identifying areas where efficiencies can free up resources, if you like. And that's where I think technology might be quite interesting, particularly in school management or administration, but also getting the right people in the right roles, I think will also free up some time for those people in the right roles to be able to then be more effective. In terms of longer term capacity, do you mean kind of the system itself? I guess that's going to have to be another interdependency or implication. We're not. We will have to think about capacity building to implement, but not more broadly for the country as a whole. So I'm not quite sure. Sorry, which type of capacity you're referring to.
Dan, do you want to jump in, or
Agreed.
just by clicking on your
sorry.
mic?
Yeah, just trying to unmute there. So if you're thinking about long-term change, I understand the emphasis on efficiencies, and I worry when we focus primarily or exclusively on efficiencies that we lose the opportunity to make long-term change. That we don't think about the increasing capacity that we'll have as we build the workforce to do more and different kinds of work. What the long-term needs will be to support this strengthened or better aligned or better educated or better prepared workforce. And so without looking at kind of a long-term plan for building the system, we won't actually make anything, we won't make substantive long-term change. We'll just, so I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah. So at the country level, for example, in Ghana, we definitely have to look at a long-term plan because we're looking at how they can deliver their education sector plan for 2030, which they've just developed. So that would be an example where we're definitely looking over that time period and how to strategically plan for and build the capacity within the system to deliver those goals. And in the education workforce report, we will include both short-term and long-term policy considerations. I mean, efficiency is one dimension as I see it. I think for me, it's about effectiveness in terms of being able to deliver a quality education. Efficiency we have to look at because we've got to somehow fund it. But it's mainly around the outcomes that we want to see from the education system. So more around effectiveness, I would say. I know efficiency is one of those words that it can cause people alarm, and I don't know how else to be able to frame it, but I think we need to think about what kind of language we use, because I know it can be interpreted differently by different people. So it's good to pick it up for us.
And I'm going to look at the last questions from Professor Moore and Kola. Just it takes us back to the goals of education a bit, but I think it's the social environment in the schools and the violence and taking a broader view of the whole child. I was particularly pleased to see a phrase in the research review that did look at that issue and did refer to the whole child as one of the starting points for your work, and so I think it's taken as a implicit part of your work, and maybe as this conversation moves forward, we can make it more explicit and perhaps help you in doing that.
Sure. I mean, it was very clear at the first high-level steering group that we are talking about the whole child, and everyone on that steering group was very, very clear about that. We haven't bottomed out exactly what that means at this moment in time, but we'll need to as part of our chapter on the vision of the education workforce. And yeah, if there's anything that you're doing or anyone's doing around addressing the culture of extremism and how we can incorporate something on that, please let us know. I know the British government are, again, very interested in that as well.
I'm smiling about that one. It's not something I expected for this conversation, but we should follow up on that. Tan's work at Simon Fraser University is just, we've got a small grant from the Canadian government to do exactly that, so we'd be happy to get back to you. But it's not. I do want to come back to the notion of goals, though, and look at perhaps some next steps. I'm going to be starting to work towards finishing up. We're about 5 minutes after the hour here, but and I think Claire has reinforced that. A couple of things, maybe beginning with a bit of process. We weren't able to we had some technical problems. We expected someone from the World Education Research Association online today, but she couldn't get in, some technical problem. And also, we are working to help the deans of education who have various national and regional groups around the world who are very interested in this initiative. And in having a stronger voice at the global level. We're very hopeful that the deans of education, particularly since it's very relevant to the broader mandate of EWI, to be more of an active conduit for us. So both with the educational research community and with the deans of education, we're hopeful that they're going to be able to pick up on this and to be an active player as we move forward. And so that's one point. And again, apologies from both the representatives who were not able to be attending. We are holding a meeting in South Africa on the evening of August 2nd, and we'll be opening that up to deans of education around the world to continue this conversation. So hopefully we're going to be able they are going to be able to come back and look at it. And then in terms of the defining the educational goals in respect to health and social development, the FRESH partnership has been doing a fair amount of work on that through a working group, and so there's actually a session next Monday that will be looking at what we found thus far in what we're calling health and personal social development education, and it's addressing some of these issues and trying to articulate that social role of schooling in a way that's a little more comprehensive, a little more coherent, because there's many different interpretations of even words like life skills or concepts like life skills and others. So we're hoping to be able to, through the FRESH partnership and through that working group, which has over 50 people involved, is come up with some sort of coherent alignment of the many concepts that underlie that simple phrase. So we're hopeful that will be useful to the education workforce and more generally to these kinds of conversations. So I'm going to be asking for any further comments, either from our two speakers or from our responders or from anybody online before we finish up the session.
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I would like to ask a question, whether you are playing any important any role in teacher education, specifically studying teacher education systems and working with teacher education providers.
Yes, so teacher education we will include in the report, and then it depends on what the need is in the country. But in Vietnam, we will be looking at teacher education around STEM. So science, technology, engineering, and maths specifically.
Okay.
But I may jump in and just say that we're looking at teacher education for health and personal and social development education quite extensively. There is a paper that's going to be is now linked to that session description if you go to the FRESH Partners website, which is the start of that conversation. So, and again, we hope to convey some of that to the EWI for their consideration. And that's with the FRESH partnership.
Great.
Further questions or comments before we finish up? Okay. Well, then, on your behalf, I'd like to thank Katie and Amy for their presentation, and Professor Morankoa for his remarks. Looking forward to the next stage, and you now have contact information, which we'll also post on the session description, and looking forward to providing further input to the EWI as they proceed. And as I've said before, I'm really pleased that you're taking that kind of systems thinking approach. It's actually, this has helped me in terms of thinking about teacher education for health education, to take a broader and more of a workforce planning approach, which is something we all need to learn more about.
Great, and thanks so much, Doug, for the opportunity once again, and thank you all for your questions and comments. They're great. We can reflect now on how to reflect on them within our work, so really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to participate.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you. Okay, all the best, everybody, and as we get into our evenings or afternoons or mornings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.